The ballroom at the downtown Marriott was loud, packed with investors, journalists, and corporate elites celebrating Sterling Enterprises' latest multi-million-dollar acquisition. Standing near the back in a plain, off-the-rack charcoal suit, I kept my hands in my pockets and watched the crowd. For 3 years, I had been the invisible man behind Sterling Enterprises, the vice president of operations who handled the brutal logistics, the late-night contract reviews, and the crisis management, while my wife, Evelyn Sterling, took all the credit as CEO. We were married, but to her and everyone in this room, I was just a quiet fixture, a convenient shadow. A wave of whispers cut through the noise as the double doors swung open. Evelyn walked in, wearing a sharp, designer red dress. But she wasn't alone. Her hand was locked in the arm of Julian Vance, the arrogant playboy heir to Vance Logistics, who flashed a diamond-encrusted watch to anyone looking his way. "Look at Evelyn and Julian," a senior manager muttered a few feet away from me, completely unaware I could hear him. "They've been inseparable for months. Honestly, what does she even see in that quiet stiff she married, Adrian? He's basically a ghost. A ghost who doesn't know when he's out of his depth." Another laughed softly. I took a slow sip of my water, my expression entirely blank. Moments later, Evelyn and Julian carved through the crowd and headed straight toward my corner. Julian's mouth curled into a patronizing smirk as he stopped right in front of me. "Adrian," Evelyn said, her tone professional and dismissive, like a boss addressing a low-level clerk. "Julian's firm is taking over the primary logistics contract for the new expansion. I expect you to hand over all your operational files to him by tomorrow morning." Julian extended a hand, though his eyes held zero respect. "Don't sweat it too much, Adrian. I know office paperwork can be a bit overwhelming for a guy with your limited skill set. Just leave the heavy lifting to the pros." I didn't shake his hand. I just stared at him. Julian's smile tightened. He leaned in close, dropping his voice so only the three of us could hear. "Everyone in corporate knows you're just a kept man living off Evelyn's scraps. Why don't you do everyone a favor? Take your pathetic little suit and walk out." Before I could react, Julian gave me a sharp, deliberate shove against the chest. The unexpected impact threw me off balance, and the glass of water in my hand sloshed over the front of my shirt. A few people nearby turned to look, gasping quietly. Julian chuckled, clapping me on the shoulder mockingly. "Oops. My bad, Adrian. Guess your balance is as weak as your career." The entire table went still. Every eye in the vicinity locked onto us, waiting to see how the submissive husband would react. I looked down at the wet fabric of my shirt, then slowly raised my gaze to Evelyn. I expected her to say something, anything, to check Julian's blatant disrespect. Instead, Evelyn crossed her arms, a look of deep annoyance crossing her face. "Adrian, stop making a scene," Evelyn said coldly, her voice cutting through the silence. "Julian was just joking around. Don't be so insecure and ruin the night for everyone. Just go clean yourself up. Just a joke. Don't be so insecure." Those words hit harder than any physical blow. 3 years of loyalty, silent sacrifices, and working 80-hour weeks to build her company. And this was how she defended me against an outsider. A cold, dead calm washed over me. The last remaining shred of affection I had for this woman evaporated into thin air. "A joke?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Yeah, a joke," Julian sneered, raising his glass. "Grow a spine, man." I didn't answer him. I turned away, walking straight toward the double doors where the hotel security team was stationed. The head of security, a towering man named Marcus, straightened up as I approached. "Mr. Knight," Marcus greeted me respectfully. "Marcus," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Call all 12 floor guards inside right now." Marcus didn't hesitate for a second. "Yes, sir." 30 seconds later, the heavy oak doors swung open wide. 14 security guards in full uniform marched into the ballroom in strict formation, cutting a wide path through the stunned crowd. Evelyn and Julian turned around, their smug expressions instantly vanishing as the guards surrounded their VIP table, locking down every exit. "Adrian, have you lost your mind?" Evelyn shrieked, her face flushing red with anger and embarrassment. "The press is right outside. Call these guards off right now." Julian panicked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Are you insane? Do you know who my father is?" I walked slowly back to the center of the ring of guards, standing right in front of their table. I reached down, unclipped the simple platinum wedding band from my finger, and dropped it straight into the center of a towering multi-tier champagne fountain. The ring sank silently to the bottom of the glass. I looked Evelyn dead in the eye, my voice echoing clearly across the dead-silent room. "Since it's a joke," I said, my lips curving into a cold, humorless smile, "let's all play." Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the entire room paralyzed in shock. Outside the hotel, the cool night air hit my face. My phone buzzed aggressively in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a high-priority message from Marcus, the chief trustee of Aegis Capital, the trillion-dollar global financial conglomerate I had secretly owned and operated from the shadows for years. "Boss," the text read, "the acquisition papers for Sterling Enterprises are fully prepared. Shall we initiate the hostile takeover tonight?" I looked back at the glowing glass doors of the hotel, where Evelyn was likely still panicking. "Initiated," I replied, sliding the phone back into my pocket. "And tell them the grace period is officially over." A fleet of 3 midnight black Cadillacs pulled up to the curb the moment I stepped onto the pavement. The doors of the center vehicle swung open, and Marcus stepped out, adjusting his tie. He bowed his head slightly. "Good evening, Mr. Knight," Marcus said quietly, opening the rear door for me. "The penthouse board is assembled. We're ready when you are." "Let's go," I said, getting into the back seat. "Did the bank freeze Sterling's line of credit yet?" "Executed 5 minutes ago," Marcus replied, sliding into the front passenger seat as the driver pulled away. "And as requested, we've put Vance Investments on our watch list. One word from you, and their credit rating drops to junk status by morning." "Hold off on Vance for now," I said, looking out the window as the city lights blurred past. "Let Julian think he's winning a little longer." 10 minutes later, the convoy pulled into the private underground garage of the Aegis Capital Tower. I took the express elevator straight to the 100th floor boardroom. The moment the doors slid open, 12 of the most influential figures in global finance, men and women who controlled central banks, shipping routes, and tech empires, stood up from the conference table and bowed. "Welcome back, Mr. Knight," they said in unison. "Sit," I said, walking to the head of the mahogany table and taking my seat. Status report on Sterling Enterprises. A senior vice president pulled up a document on the central display. "Sterling's cash flow relies entirely on a pending $20 million bridge loan from our commercial division. Without it, they can't pay their suppliers for the new expansion project. Their payroll bounces in 48 hours. Who signed off on their initial application?" I asked. "Your wife." "Excuse me, Evelyn Sterling submitted it personally last week," Marcus answered. "In fact, she and Julian Vance have been sitting in our first-floor executive lobby since 8 a.m. today, desperate for a 5-minute meeting with the regional managing director." I leaned back, resting my elbows on the armrests. "Bring up the lobby feed." The screen split, showing live footage of the lobby downstairs. Evelyn was pacing back and forth near the reception desk, clutching a thick leather folder, her hair slightly unkempt from stress. Julian was sitting on the couch nearby, aggressively typing on his phone, looking flustered. "She has no idea Aegis owns 80% of her primary creditor," Marcus added smoothly. "She thinks she's just dealing with a tough local bank." "Let's keep it that way for another hour," I said. "Send the credit denial down right now. Cite extreme management instability and high risk of executive fraud." "Understood, sir." Downstairs in the lobby, the chief loan officer walked out of the glass doors and approached Evelyn. "Mrs. Sterling?" the officer asked coldly. Evelyn spun around, her eyes lit with desperate hope. "Yes, Mr. Davis, thank you for seeing us. Did the board review our bridge loan application?" Davis didn't bother taking the hand she offered. He handed her a single-page document. "Application denied, Mrs. Sterling. Effective immediately." Evelyn's face drained of color. "Denied? What are you talking about? We have the government contract. Our projections are rock solid." Julian jumped up from the couch, stepping in Davis's face. "Do you know who I am? Vance Investments is backing this deal. You can't just reject us." "Mr. Vance, your family's firm is currently under review by our risk assessment team," Davis replied, his voice completely level. "And frankly, our chairman personally reviewed Sterling's file 10 minutes ago. His exact words were that Sterling Enterprises lacks basic executive integrity." "Your chairman?" Evelyn gasped, grabbing Davis's sleeve. Please, let me talk to him. Just give me 5 minutes. I can explain everything. The chairman doesn't meet with low-tier clients, Davis said, pulling his arm back cleanly. Security will escort you out. Panicked, Evelyn looked down at the rejection paper in her shaking hands. At the bottom of the document, right next to the official Aegis seal, was a sharp, handwritten signature stamp, a stylized, sweeping K with a distinct underline. Evelyn froze. Her breath hitched. 3 years ago, on the day they got married, she had found a scrap piece of paper on my desk with that exact same unique, stylized signature. She had laughed back then, telling me my handwriting was too dramatic for an accountant. Her heart hammered against her ribs as a terrifying, surreal thought crossed her mind. No, it's impossible, she thought, her fingers trembling against the paper. Adrian is just a low-level worker. He can't be. Julian grabbed her shoulder, snapping her out of it. Evelyn, let's go. These guys are idiots. I'll call my father right now. We'll get the money from his firm. Evelyn looked up at the towering glass ceiling of the Aegis building, a cold, sickening pit opening up in her stomach. Evelyn practically sprinted up the marble steps of Grand Vista Villa, the heavy iron keys jingling violently in her hand. Her mind was a complete mess after the embarrassment at the Aegis building, and all she wanted was to lock herself in her home office to review Sterling's liquid assets. Julian, stop following me. Evelyn snapped, shoving open the grand oak front doors. Evelyn, calm down. Julian insisted, rushing in right behind her. My dad's already working on a private loan. We don't need Aegis capital. We needed that bridge loan, Julian. She yelled, turning on him in the entryway. Do you have any idea how fast our suppliers are going to pull out when word gets around that Aegis rejected us? Before Julian could answer, heavy footsteps echoed down the grand staircase. A sharp-dressed man holding a leather binder stepped into the foyer, flanked by two uniformed movers carrying a heavy wooden crate. It was Daniel Vance, the city's premier land registry attorney, and ironically, Julian's second cousin. Julian frowned, confused. Daniel, what are you doing here? Daniel looked at Julian, then at Evelyn, his face devoid of any professional warmth. Executing an asset repossession order, Mrs. Sterling. Evelyn stared at him, incredulous. Repossession? Are you out of your mind? This is my house. I bought this estate 3 years ago. Correction, Mrs. Sterling, Daniel said calmly, opening his binder and pulling out a blue-bound legal document. You occupied this estate 3 years ago. You never owned it. That's absurd. Evelyn snatched the paper from his hand. My name is on the title. I signed the papers myself. Read Clause 4, Daniel replied, pointing a clean finger at the bottom of the page. The full purchase price of $50 million was wired directly from an offshore private trust belonging exclusively to Mr. Adrian Knight. Your name was listed as a temporary resident under a revocable conditional trust agreement. Evelyn's eyes scanned the fine print, her breathing growing fast and shallow. No, this is wrong. Adrian didn't have $50 million. He was broke when I met him. Adrian Knight has never been broke, Daniel said, his voice flat. And it doesn't stop with this villa. I suggest you check your corporate land records as well. What are you talking about? Julian demanded, stepping up beside Evelyn. Speak plainly, Daniel. Daniel turned his gaze to Julian. The land beneath Sterling Enterprises' corporate headquarters, the secondary distribution warehouses, and 80% of the master equipment leases are all owned by Adrian Knight's private holding company. He leased them back to Sterling Enterprises for a symbolic fee of $1 a year. The paper slipped from Evelyn's fingers, fluttering onto the polished marble floor. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to grab the edge of the entryway console table to keep from falling. $1 a year. Every single success Sterling Enterprises had achieved over the last 3 years. The massive profit margins, the low overhead, the glowing news articles praising her as a financial prodigy. It was all a complete illusion. She hadn't built an empire. Adrian had simply let her play inside his. He gave me everything, Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking as tears filled her eyes. All this time, I thought I was carrying him. Julian's face twisted in rage and humiliation. This is bullshit. He tricked you. He was keeping secrets from you the whole time. What kind of husband does that? Shut up, Julian. Evelyn screamed, turning on him with a look of pure fury. Just shut the hell up. Julian flinched, stepping back. Evelyn, I'm on your side here. You shoved him, she yelled, her tears overflowing. You humiliated him at the party, and I stood there like an idiot and told him to apologize to you. God, what did I do? Her phone rang violently in her pocket. She snatched it out with shaking hands. It was the vice chairman of her board. Evelyn, where the hell are you? The vice chairman roared over the speaker. The Vance family just called an emergency board meeting for 2 o'clock. They're trying to force a vote to strip your executive powers and take over the company. Evelyn froze, staring at Julian. Julian's eyes darted around nervously. He swallowed hard, trying to regain his composure. Look, Evelyn, my dad and I are just trying to protect the company's assets. Get out, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. Evelyn, listen to me. I said get out of my house. She shrieked. Daniel quietly gestured to the movers, who stepped up and blocked Julian's path. Julian glared at Evelyn, realizing he had lost his grip on her, before turning on his heel and storming out the front door. Evelyn collapsed onto the stairs, burying her face in her hands, weeping hysterically as the reality of her stupidity crushed her. By 1:45 p.m., the executive conference room on the 50th floor of Sterling Enterprises was buzzing with panic. The emergency board meeting had been called on less than 2 hours' notice, and every director present knew the company was drowning. Julian Vance sat near the head of the table, his collar unbuttoned, looking aggressive. Beside him sat his father, Richard Vance, the managing director of Vance Investments. Let's bring this meeting to order, Richard said, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. We all know Sterling Enterprises is facing an unprecedented liquidity crisis. The bridge loan was rejected. Suppliers are threatening to freeze shipments by 5 p.m. So what's the plan, Richard? One of the veteran board members asked anxiously. Evelyn isn't even here yet. Evelyn Sterling is unfit to lead, Julian cut in, his voice loud and arrogant. My father and I have a solution. Vance Investments will inject $15 million of private capital right now. In exchange, we take 60% of voting equity and full operational control. Sign the agreement, and the company survives. $15 million for 60%. The vice chairman gasped. That's a hostile takeover. The company is worth at least $200 million. It was worth $200 million yesterday. Richard sneered. Today, without our cash, it's worth zero. Vote yes, or walk away broke. The board members looked at each other, cornered and terrified. Just as Richard pushed the signing documents across the table, the heavy double doors at the back of the room were kicked open with a loud bang. Every head turned. A dozen security guards dressed in crisp black suits marched in, instantly lining the perimeter of the room. Walking right behind them was a tall, imposing figure in a custom-tailored dark blue suit. It was me. Walking beside me was Serafina Cross, the premier corporate litigation attorney in the country, holding a thick leather folder. Julian snapped, pointing an enraged finger at me. Adrian, what the hell are you doing here? Security, throw this loser out. None of the guards moved. In fact, the lead security officer stepped aside and bowed his head slightly as I walked past him. Sit down, Julian, I said calmly, stepping up to the head of the table. You don't belong in this boardroom, Adrian. Julian shouted, standing up and slamming his fists on the table. You're a nobody. You got fired from operations yesterday. Serafina stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a razor blade. Mr. Vance, I suggest you lower your tone. You are speaking to the absolute majority shareholder of Sterling Enterprises. Richard Vance laughed mockingly. Majority shareholder? Is this a joke? Evelyn and the board hold all the equity. As of 12 p.m. today, Serafina said, opening her folder and slapping 3 official documents onto the table, Aegis Capital executed a full legal foreclosure on all defaulted loans and credit guarantees tied to Sterling Enterprises. Mr. Adrian Knight personally holds 82% of the master voting shares. She turned her icy gaze to Richard. Furthermore, under Clause 9 of the master lease, Mr. Knight has officially terminated Sterling Enterprises' lease for this entire building. You are currently trespassing on his private property. Silence fell over the room like a heavy anvil. Richard's face went completely gray. Aegis Capital? He owns Aegis. 82%, the vice chairman whispered, his jaw dropping. He owns the whole company. 3 board members who had just agreed to side with Julian instantly stood up, their chairs screeching against the floor. They practically tripped over themselves rushing toward me, bowing frantically. "Mr. Knight, forgive us," one of them pleaded, his voice shaking. "We were misled by Richard Vance. We had no idea you were the true owner. Please, Mr. Knight, don't liquidate. We'll vote however you want." Another begged. I didn't even look at them. I pulled out the high-backed executive chair at the head of the table and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. Serafina stood faithfully at my right side. Just then, the conference room doors opened again. Evelyn stood in the doorway, pale, exhausted, and eyes red from crying. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at me sitting in the CEO chair, flanked by elite lawyers and security. Our eyes met across the room. Her lips trembled, but she couldn't utter a single word. "Evelyn," I said, my voice cold, calm, and detached. "You're late for your own board meeting." She took a shaky step forward, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Adrian, please. Save it," I interrupted, turning my attention back to Julian and Richard Vance. "Now, let's address the Vance family." Julian's brain couldn't process what was happening. He looked at his father, who was staring blankly at the legal documents on the table, then looked back at me sitting at the head of the board. "No, no way," Julian yelled, his voice cracking with delusion. "This is a setup. You forged these papers, Adrian. You're a damn house husband. Where would you get billions of dollars?" He lunged across the table, reaching for my lapels. "I'll kill you, you lying bastard." Before his hands could even reach across the mahogany, two heavy security guards grabbed Julian by the arms, slammed him chest first onto the conference table, and pinned him down. A coffee cup tipped over, spilling hot liquid across his lapels. "Let go of me. Dad, say something," Julian screamed, struggling against the guards. "Call the cops." Richard Vance slowly sank back into his chair, his hands trembling uncontrollably as he looked at Serafina. "Miss Cross, is Aegis really backed by Mr. Knight?" "Mr. Knight is Aegis Capital, Richard," Serafina replied coolly. "And while your son was playing CEO, our forensic accounting team spent the last 3 hours going through Vance Investments' books." She pulled a red-labeled folder from her leather briefcase and dropped it right in front of Richard. "Bank fraud, wire fraud, 3 counts of corporate tax evasion, and a $50 million Ponzi scheme running through your offshore shell companies," Serafina listed flatly. "The SEC and the FBI received the complete files 20 minutes ago." Richard's eyes went wide. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking 20 years older in a matter of seconds. "What?" Julian stopped thrashing, staring up at his father from where he was pinned to the table. "Dad, what is she talking about? Our firm is solid." "Shut up, Julian," Richard suddenly roared, slamming his forehead down onto the table right next to his son. "Just shut your mouth." Richard scrambled off his chair, hit his knees on the carpet, and began crawling toward my side of the table. "Mr. Knight, Lord Knight, please." Richard sobbed, his hands clutching the base of my chair. It was all Julian. He wanted to impress Evelyn. He pushed the fake accounting. "I didn't know. Spare my firm, please. We'll give you everything." "Dad, what are you doing?" Julian cried out, horrified as he watched his proud father grovel on the floor. "Get up. Why are you begging this dog?" "I told you to shut up, you worthless idiot." Richard screamed back at his son, tears and sweat dripping down his nose. "He can erase our entire family with a single phone call. You ruined us." Evelyn watched the scene from near the doorway, her hands pressed over her mouth. She looked at Julian, the man she had brought into our lives, the man she thought was a brilliant, wealthy savior, crying and covered in spilled coffee on a conference table. Then she looked at his father, begging like a street beggar at my feet. A wave of deep, sickening disgust washed over her. She couldn't believe how blind she had been. I leaned forward slightly, looking down at Richard. "You backed the wrong horse, Richard. And your son through the first hands." I looked at the lead guard. "Take them down to the lobby. The FBI should be waiting in the driveway by now." "Right away, sir." The guards lifted Julian off the table and yanked Richard up by his collar. "Adrian, please, give me one more chance." Julian screamed as he was dragged backward toward the doors, his expensive shoes scraping uselessly against the floor. "Evelyn, tell him to stop." Evelyn turned her head away, refusing to even look at him. "Evelyn, you bitch. You did this to me." Julian shrieked, his voice echoing down the corridor until the heavy doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off the noise completely. The boardroom was dead quiet. The remaining directors sat perfectly still, terrified that making a sound would draw my attention to them. I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket, and looked toward the doorway. Evelyn stood there alone, looking smaller and more broken than I had ever seen her. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice choked with tears as she took 2 steps toward me. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see. I didn't know anything." I picked up my phone from the table and walked toward the exit, my face completely impassive. As I passed her, I didn't even slow my pace. "Clear your office by 5 p.m., Evelyn," I said quietly, not bothering to turn my head. "The new management team arrives at 6. By 4:30 p.m., the rain was pouring heavily against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite. Evelyn stood alone in her former office, clutching a single cardboard box packed with a few personal items and a framed picture of our wedding day from 3 years ago. Her hand trembled as she looked at the picture. Back then, I had worn a simple rented tuxedo, and she had secretly felt a sting of embarrassment when her friends poked fun at my modest background. Now, looking at the frame, every memory felt like a physical slap to her face. The heavy office doors clicked open. Evelyn spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. I walked in, flanked by Marcus and 2 auditors holding tablets. I stopped a few feet away from her desk, my expression unreadable. "You have 20 minutes left, Evelyn," I said flatly, pulling a pen from my inner jacket pocket. "Adrian." Evelyn dropped the box onto the desk, taking a step toward me. Tears instantly welled up in her red, swollen eyes. "Please, just listen to me for 5 minutes. Don't do this to us." "There is no us, Evelyn," I said, my tone as cold and sharp as ice. "There hasn't been an us for a long time." "I was wrong," she cried, reaching out to touch my arm. But Marcus quietly stepped between us, cutting off her path. Evelyn flinched, pulling her hand back. "I was blind, Adrian. Julian lied to me. He manipulated me. Julian didn't shove me into a table at the Marriott while you stood by and told me to stop making a scene," I interrupted, looking her dead in the eye. "Julian didn't strip me of my operational role to hand it to a guy he knew was disrespecting me. You did that, Evelyn. On your own." Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut. Sob racked her shoulders. I thought I was protecting the company. I was under so much stress, and Julian promised he had the resources." "He had nothing," I said coldly. "And you traded a husband who handed you an empire on a silver platter for a scam artist with a fancy watch." I gestured to Marcus, who stepped forward and laid a crisp, white legal document on top of her cardboard box. "Divorce papers," I said. "I've already signed my portion. You keep the personal bank account you accumulated over the last 3 years, as well as your personal vehicle. Everything else, the house, the company equity, the intellectual property, remains with Aegis Capital." Evelyn stared at the document, her jaw trembling. "You're taking everything?" "I'm taking back what was mine," I corrected her softly. "You came into this marriage with a failing startup and $3 million in debt. I paid off your creditors, built your supply lines, and gave you a reputation. You didn't build sterling enterprises, Evelyn. You were just the pretty face on the billboard." The words hit her like a sledgehammer. She stumbled back against the edge of the desk, clutching her chest. "Sign the papers, Evelyn," I added, stepping closer and placing the pen beside the document. "Or Serafina will file a formal suit against you tomorrow morning for gross mismanagement and corporate breach of fiduciary duty. If that happens, you won't even keep your personal savings." Evelyn looked at the pen, then looked up at me, searching my eyes for even a single trace of the gentle, patient husband who used to bring her coffee at 2 a.m. while she worked late. There was nothing left, just a stranger with absolute power. Realizing she had zero leverage, her hand shook violently as she picked up the pen. She pressed the tip to the signature line, tears dripping onto the clean paper, blurring the black ink as she wrote her name. "It's done," she choked out, dropping the pen onto the desk. I picked up the signed document, handed it to Marcus without looking at it, and turned toward the exit. "Adrian, wait," Evelyn called out, her voice breaking completely. "Are you ever going to forgive me? Is there any chance? Ever?" I stopped at the doorway, resting my hand on the handle. I didn't turn around. "You had a king sitting right beside you for 3 years, Evelyn," I said quietly. "And you traded him for a beggar. Live with your choice." I pulled the door open and stepped out into the hallway, leaving her alone in the empty room, weeping hysterically against the cold glass windows. The rain had stopped by the time I descended to the subterranean executive garage. Marcus stood beside the open door of my Maybach, holding his tablet. The police just formally arrested Julian and Richard Vance outside the lobby, Marcus reported as I sat back into the leather seat. The SEC has frozen all Vance family accounts, and their creditors are already filing for emergency liquidation. By midnight, they'll be bankrupt. Good, I said, tapping my phone screen. And Evelyn? She packed her box and left through the side exit 10 minutes ago. Her corporate credit cards have been canceled, and security escorted her off the property. Marcus paused slightly before adding, "She tried to call your personal cell 6 times. Block her number," I replied without hesitation. "Have Serafina file the finalized divorce decree with the court first thing tomorrow morning." "Understood, sir." Marcus closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. "Where to now, Mr. Knight?" "The Aegis headquarters. We have a press conference at 9. The next morning, the grand auditorium at Aegis Capitol Tower was packed with over 200 journalists, news anchors, and financial analysts. Cameras flashed incessantly as I stepped onto the main stage in a tailored suit, taking my place behind the podium. The room erupted into a barrage of shouting reporters. "Mr. Knight, is it true that you were the mysterious chairman of Aegis Capital all along? How does this impact the collapse of Vance Investments? What is the future of Sterling Enterprises now that Evelyn Sterling has been removed as CEO?" I raised one hand slightly, and the entire auditorium went dead silent. "Effective today," I spoke clearly into the microphone, "Aegis Capital has completed the total acquisition of Sterling Enterprises. The company will be restructured under our primary logistics arm. All existing supply contracts signed under previous management are officially null and void." A female reporter in the front row stood up. "Mr. Knight, reports are circulating that you were married to Evelyn Sterling until yesterday. Did this acquisition stem from a personal vendetta?" "Business is never personal," I answered smoothly, my expression impassive. "Evelyn Sterling was an employee whose contract was terminated due to gross operational incompetence and poor risk management. Aegis Capital exists to create value, not to sponsor amateur hour." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "As for Vance Investments," I continued, looking directly into the primary news camera, "their fraudulent activities were a threat to the market stability. They have been stripped of their licenses, and their management team will face the full weight of federal law." I leaned slightly closer to the mic. "The era of fake elites riding on stolen authority is over in this city. Thank you." Without taking further questions, I stepped away from the podium and walked off the stage to the rhythmic thunder of camera shutters. 2 hours later, Evelyn sat in a small, cramped booth at a greasy diner 3 miles away from downtown. The small TV mounted in the corner was playing the live broadcast of my press conference. She watched me on the screen, calm, powerful, and completely out of her reach, delivering the cold truth to the entire nation. Evelyn Sterling was an employee whose contract was terminated due to gross operational incompetence. The words broadcasted across national television echoed in her ears. Her hands shook so violently that her cheap coffee spilled over the rim of the mug, staining her paper napkin. Her phone chimed on the table. It was a text notification from her bank. "Alert! Your remaining account balance is $14,250. Recurring autodraft for Grand Vista Villa has failed due to account termination." She closed her eyes, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her pale cheeks. She had lost her husband, her company, her status, and her home in less than 24 hours. She was no longer the celebrated prodigy CEO of the city. She was just an unemployed woman sitting alone in a cheap diner, watching the man she discarded rule the world from above. My Maybach glided smoothly past the glass front of the diner on its way out of the district. I looked out the tinted window for a brief second, catching a glimpse of the neon diner sign before looking straight ahead at the open road. The shadow had stepped into the light, and there was no turning back.